No risk it, no biscuit.
Coming from the Arizona desert, presented by SBNation.com. For Arizona Cardinals fans, by Arizona Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider's perspectives, this is Revenge of the Birds. Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. This is Jess Root, and this is Revenge of the Birds Radio. As we are with you tonight on a Tuesday night recording, as we tend to do for our all Cardinal show, but not all as well in Cardinals land as it was the last couple of weeks, because the Cardinals suffered the first loss of the season, suffering a home loss, a division loss, 24-22 on Sunday against the St. Louis Rams, a game marred with Cardinals mistakes, and pretty much a perfect game plan by the Rams, who did just enough to fend off the Cardinals, who still were that close to winning the game as well. But so tonight we're going to be talking about the Cardinals-Rams and maybe a little bit looking forward to Cardinals-Lions. And we've got Seth Cox on the line. Seth, how are you doing tonight?
Doing well, Jess. How are you?
Doing great, except for that game was beyond frustrating. It got up to the... You knew... Really, basically, with that opening kickoff, you're like, oh, man, this is one of those games. It's kind of like, oh, okay. That's how I felt right when David Johnson fumbled that kickoff from the start.
Yeah, it was one of those. Oh, here comes the clunker. Every team has one. I mean, outside of what the 06 Patriots, who just lost the thriller in the Super Bowl. I mean, every team has a clunker. It happens to all the teams, and this was hopefully the only one we'll see from the Cardinals this year. It may not be the only loss, but hopefully it's the one where you just see a lot of mistakes compounded and pile up in the one single setting.
So let's go ahead and get started. This show, Revenge of the Birds Radio, is brought to you by Audible.com, the internet's leading audio content provider, and Revenge of the Birds listeners can get a free month trial of the service and a free audiobook download by visiting audibletrial.com/Revenge of the Birds. Get that free audiobook download by visiting audibletrial.com/Revenge of the Birds. And, well, we're going to talk a little bit about that. So we're going to start off by talking, well, why the Cardinals lose. I mean, we're going to break it down basically, what were the reasons why they lost, and basically the question is, and with all due respect to the Rams, we're going to ask this question. Did the Rams really beat the Cardinals, or did the Cardinals beat the Cardinals? We're going to talk about the issues that came up, or talk about the good that came up. And then a little bit, Seth and I were off the air talking about this, the significance of the loss in the big picture of the season. And then, well, how worried are we entering Week 5 as the Cardinals now start on a 6 of the next 8 weeks, 6 of the next 8 games, rather, on the road. The first being Detroit this weekend, as they will face a winless Detroit Lions team. Seth will tell you why he's worried. I'll tell you why I'm not nearly as worried. But that's what we'll start off with. This is all Cardinals show, and let's talk about this. Why did the Cardinals win? Seth, did the Rams beat the Cardinals, or did the Cardinals beat the Cardinals?
I think the first half, the Cardinals beat the Cardinals when you have, like we talked about, the boneheaded turnover. I know a lot of people don't want to blame Carson for that throw, but that ball was just underthrown. When the interception occurred, and when you have turnovers like that against a team that is built to play from ahead, something that we talked about last week, guess what happened in the second half? The Rams were able to basically run the game out and lean on the future rushing champion of the NFL. Maybe not in 2015, but 2017 probably, Todd Gurley, and that's why, as much as running backs don't get taken in the top for the first round anymore, that's why he was taken at number 10 overall. So I think the first half was a lot of the Cardinals, and the second half was just a lot of the Rams doing things to win the game and forcing the Cardinals into bad throws, bad decisions, and things of that nature.
And for me, and as much as I want to make this very clear, I don't want to disrespect the Rams because they came in and executed. I'll tell you this way: the Rams played the best game they could have, based on their talent level, based on what they do. They came in and played a perfect Rams game and got the win. Having said that, though, the Rams didn't beat the Cardinals, in my opinion, because despite the perfect game plan from St. Louis, it came down to just a couple of plays. The Cardinals beat the Cardinals, and we can point to just a handful of plays overall. The David Johnson fumble. He doesn't fumble that first play, and they don't score that initial touchdown. Cardinals have been going down and scoring. Whether or not they score, they get a couple first downs. The way they
probably take a field goal.
Probably, or even maybe they score a touchdown. But the way that the first half went offensively or at least that first quarter, it was 3 plays, 3 plays, 3 plays, 3 plays. Now the first series, it was 3 plays and a touchdown. So if they punt the ball away, they start back in their territory, 20, 30, 35-yard line. They're not scoring that first drive, and the Cardinals get on the board first, and it's a different complexion. So you could say that. There's really one play that was the difference maker, and it was David Johnson's try. So David Johnson, twice, he bungled it with the fumble, but really the game changer was the drop in the end zone. That's where you can say, because when he fumbled that play, the defense still could have stopped him. They could have taken the ball away. They could have held him to 3 points. That's the difference. But David Johnson's drop in the end zone, that's 4 points. That's 4 points. They just lost right there. They lost by 2, game changer. Fitz fumbled. There was the interception. Even then what comes to the end? Carson Palmer, when they needed him to be on target, had 2 bad throws. And so at the end of the day, as perfect a game plan as the Rams did, in my opinion, the Rams didn't really beat the Cardinals because the Cardinals beat the Cardinals because they made mistakes they normally don't make. And take 1 or 2 of those mistakes away, the game's different. It was just a tough win.
Right, and I get that part, but I think that takes a little bit away from what the Rams did, and to the point of you hit on the fact that Palmer flat out missed those last 2 throws. People were screaming about why are you running, or why aren't you running the ball? And I don't disagree with that, but Palmer missed bad on both those throws. Not even the receiver probably could have made a play on the ball. No, he missed on both those throws.
No, the throw to Johnson was awful. The throw to Brown, if that's Michael Floyd, he probably makes that catch. If it's Larry Fitzgerald, he probably makes that catch. But because it was Jerron Brown, he timed us. The throw was high, so it wasn't a good throw. But Jerron also didn't make a good play on the ball. He jumped late.
Well, and this is where I know a lot of people get upset at the play calling on that. And I had, you and I talked about it through text and off the air. I had some problems with the the run-pass ratio, but I didn't have a problem with the play call. I had a problem with Carson's reads a lot of the time. On that play, you need 2 yards. Why are you going on a 15-yard out from the far hash? Why are you making probably one of the most difficult throws in the NFL on a 3rd and 2? Just get the first down, right? That's on Carson more than it is on Bruce. And then like you said, the David Johnson throw is just a bungled throw.
That was, if you had to pick, that was a classic 2007 to 2012 Carson Palmer throw. That's the Carson Palmer who doesn't win in the postseason. It's kind of like the reputation. He's brought along a lot of teams back. He's had a lot of fourth quarter drives for game winners. That was your classic Tony Romo type moment where he had a big moment, he didn't make the throw. And the worst part about that was really I don't know what happened. He had David Johnson early, and he had time. He rushed a throw that had no reason to be rushed. That would have been a touchdown. If he's on target, that's a touchdown.
Well, and that was what my point was going to be. Both those throws were rushed by Palmer, and I think they were rushed because of the pressure that the Rams had gotten all day. It looked like he felt ghosts on that play, and he was worried about getting hit. And again, I don't blame him. Like, the dude took a litany of shots in that game. And so to say, oh, you got to stand there and make a strong throw, like, you go out there and get hit by Aaron Donald and Robert Quinn and Chris Long all day and tell me you're ready to stand in there. But I think that's where we differ, is that, Palmer missed those throws, but I truly believe that the reason he missed those throws was because he was looking to get hit again, and that's what the Rams' game plan success is to, by the end of the game, be in the quarterback's head and say, okay, where am I going to get in from? Because those were probably two of the better pockets he had all day.
That was the protection especially on that fourth down throw. The protection was great. He hesitated for a moment, then made a rush throw for some reason. On that particular play, what I was shocked, and I get why he did that. He has that Bruce Arians mentality. Look, a touchdown is there. But on that fourth down play, what you saw, Larry Fitzgerald is coming right across perfectly. It's an easy throw to him at the sticks. They get the first down. They get, they could even run the ball a couple more times because all they needed was just a couple of yards, and he would have probably picked up another couple after that. But I was shocked he didn't go to Fitz in the first place because he was open. It was an easy throw to make, and Carson it looked like he got the yips on that particular throw. Something we really haven't seen from Carson, but in a clutch moment, he got the yips.
Yep, and like I said, I think that's the interpretation difference. I interpret that as he got the yips because he's been hit all day, and you interpret it as he just got the yips because he just probably, he felt some pressure that wasn't there, but he just missed the throw. And so that's where I think the difference is, and I think it's fair either way. I think that, and we talked about it last week, I thought that was the only way the Rams win the game is if they get ahead and they force the Cardinals to throw, and that's what happened, unfortunately. And, that 46-21 run or pass-run ratio, that plays right into the hands of the St. Louis Rams, and that Greg Williams attack that call it dirty, call it whatever you want, but that's where they're going to make their money. And if you can run the ball on that team, which the Cardinals did well,
they did actually well. Again, they did it well, 20-20. The reason why they couldn't punch the ball in the end zone when they got that first and goal at the 1, and looking at those two plays, there was really nothing on those particular plays. They ended up and we talked about how well Chris Johnson had done the first few weeks of the season on his lack of negative plays. I think I counted 5 negative runs for Johnson against the Rams, and that's in part, my goodness, the Rams did a really good job against the run overall. I mean, it kept them, like you always talk about, they kept them from being on schedule, which is why Bruce went with the more passes. They had success running the ball. They had some big plays running the ball, but they weren't consistently getting 1, 2, 3 yards. It was, okay, he got 10, he gets 15, then he got -2, he got -3, -1. It was much more of an Andre Ellington type running game from what we saw from Chris Johnson.
Yeah, and a lot of those negative plays came, surprisingly enough, coming to the outside behind like the Upati, or not Upati, excuse me, Veldier and a tight end and Jonathan Cooper pulling, and I think that was kind of surprising too. We know Robert Quinn's really good. I mean, nobody's going to take anything away from that guy, but I was surprised that that Veldier had the struggles in the run game that he had in this game. That was surprising to me.
And then I'm looking here. Aaron Donald, I mean, did it seem to you that the Cardinals were basically just afraid to run at Aaron Donald, because while we did see that they could have some success inside, but they really tried to avoid interior running.
Yeah, and I think that is Donald, because he has such an upfield presence. He's like Darnell Dockett in his prime plus, like, and that's not a shot at Dockett. That's just how good Donald is. I mean,
well, Dockett was one of the most disruptive defensive players when he was playing that 4-3 in. Yeah,
and when you look at what Aaron Donald does, I mean, there's probably 5 defensive players right now in the NFL that have as much impact on a game plan as Aaron Donald, and we've seen it. We've seen it when the Cardinals had to face J.J. Watt. I think that was last year or 2 years ago. That's basically the class he's in year 2 of his NFL career, and that's a huge compliment. But that's also the truth, because that guy's really good right now.
Now we talk about some of the something I want to bring up, because it doesn't really fall into the things we kind of talk about, how the Cardinals beat the Cardinals, Rams beat the Cardinals. There is also the factor where you say that the officials beat the Cardinals. There were, I know you saw a tweet that you mentioned from, I don't remember who it was, that there were an egregious amount of missed calls. I don't know if that is typical. I think there were 9 calls that benefited the Cardinals, 6 for the benefit of the Rams, and just 3 of those were game-changing. Obviously, the biggest one was that I have no idea, and in the world, I think the 2 plays later after they couldn't recover the fumble in the scrum, that one you can understand. They should just get it, but the refs couldn't make a call. Gurley had the ball again at the end of the scrum, and there was nothing video-wise to say that the Cardinals had it, because by the time you see the scrum, no one had it. But to call that play just a couple of plays later as stop the forward progress is, truthfully, it is just unimaginable. It's completely inexcusable to call that play. It's like the refs just didn't know what to do. They saw the fumble, BA tosses the challenge flag, and then they talk. They're like, I don't know what to do because we missed it. No, it was just forward progress. So it wasn't like they initially, because there wasn't a whistle. It was what they decided after the play was over. And that was just I don't get the play at all. But BA, interestingly enough, Bruce, who loves to bark at officials, he was real matter of fact. That play doesn't matter if we grab the ball when it's between our legs, as the ball was it was between Deon's legs. Minter had a shot at it, Lamar had a shot at it, but have you ever seen a play like that where a guy that's running laterally and gets tackled right away gets called for forward progress start? I've never seen that in my life.
I was trying to remember, and I went back and looked, and I honestly couldn't remember. I swore 2 or 3 years ago we had a similar play, and I'm pretty sure it was 2 years ago with DA in his first season. I swore that they had something similar to that happen, but in the scope of everything, I hate those judgment calls that blow plays dead. Like, I hate when they blow a play dead on a fumble that a defender picks up and then can score a touchdown on, and they blow it dead. And so then they just get, like, I hate those judgment calls that end plays in general. Like, that's the worst part, and like the worst way to decide anything is to say, well, the play was dead. Like, that defeats the purpose of the game in itself of trying to make a play. Look at the Seattle game last night. Even if you ignore the batting of the ball, the Cam Chancellor, forced fumble, like, that was, incredible. That's an incredible play. Go back 2 years, Tyrann Mathieu forced fumble on Jared Cook. That's an incredible play. And plays like that, won't be able to happen as often if you start, blowing the whistle dead for those stupid, play calls of, he looked like he was kind of stopped, so we blew the whistle dead, and we just missed that. But sorry, they get the ball back.
For me, there was a play that I recall with Rashard Mendenhall, which was the exact opposite. That was ruled a fumble, where I don't remember which game it was. Obviously, it was 2013. But he gets the ball right up the middle. It's right around their own 20, maybe their own 15, and he's running the ball, hits the pile, and the ball comes out, but you could tell the forward progress was stopped, and they just waited so long to blow the whistle, and the ball went down, and they ruled, it wasn't, they ruled it was a fumble because forward progress hadn't stopped, yet that was kind of the other extreme where they wait a long time to blow the whistle, and the ball comes out because they were holding him up trying to strip the ball away.
Yeah, well, and, the Cardinals have had fumble issues before. I mean, we all remember the New York Giants and the
Victor Cruz giving himself
up. Yeah,
which
so, I mean,
I think was the right call because that's really what he was doing. I think it just seemed really weird at the time.
Yeah, and that's why I said I hate any of those play calls where it's a judgment as opposed to letting the play and the players dictate what happened. Forward progress to me is going backwards, being forced backwards. And I don't see where he was forced backwards there, but whatever, I can't.
So we talked a little bit about that. Let's move on to some of the issues we ran across. Obviously, the offensive line was an issue. There wasn't enough of a pass rush. We mentioned a little bit the play calling, and we can talk about perhaps the Todd Gurley effect and the Tavon Austin strategy that the Cardinals used. But let's talk about the offensive line. Pro Football Focus had their grades come out, and they only had one offensive lineman graded positively, and that was Mike Iupati. When I look back at the game, Iupati had a really good game. Super physical. He wasn't perfect, but he did well the entire game. He was moving around like the Cardinals. What you saw from Iupati is what you say, hey, that's what you want them to do. And mauling people all over the place. He's getting off on the edge. He's going to the second level. But everyone else, Bobby Massey was almost a positive. He graded out as a negative .2. And he graded pretty highly on Pro Football Focus in run blocking. But everyone else was a negative. Cooper and Massey both gave up 4 pressures according to those numbers. And I remember you talking to me, you texted me after the game about how you graded them out. How did you grade out the offensive line after the game?
It went Iupati, thin line, Massey, Valdir, and Cooper. So I think I only had Massey and thin line flip-flopped and versus what Pro Football Focus graded them.
Pro Football Focus, PFF, they had, I think you had Sunline as the worst graded one of all 5.
Oh, did they?
I think so.
Yeah,
I no, but you made a point. And go ahead, make a point that you were going to talk about Jonathan Cooper. You texted me how, yes, we see him moving around like a crazy guy. We see him moving around the next level. We see him pulling. But anytime he has to stay in his, at least from what I saw, anytime he's got to stay in his phone booth, he's getting beat.
You watch Cooper play, and he's fun to watch, and because he's so athletic, and he's out in front of things. But even on a couple of his pulls, he's making contact, but he's not sustaining anything, and he's not getting at the point of attack, he's not always getting the push that you want to see. I get the idea that this is game, 5.5 or 6 for him in his career. So I do get the idea that he's still, a rookie in games played. But
and playing on the opposite side of the line than what he has done almost his entire career.
But you would like to see, a little more from the guy that you drafted 7th overall. I've just had a problem with more than anything, his run blocking, because that's what we expected him to excel at. and where he would, be the biggest, what's the word I'm looking for? That's where he would have the most impact on the game. And it just looks like so far it's been a lot more flash, it's been a lot more flash than actual substance. And so you just want to see a little more consistency from him in the run game. I just looked at Pro Football Focus. Yeah, they had Finline graded badly. Here's the difference between how I graded it and how they graded it, and I'm going to almost bet you this is what happened. They gave Finline negative marks for almost all of Donald's positive marks, where I didn't think he was in charge of Donald as much as they did. So, but that's where they do get in trouble a lot. And I don't know the play either, so I don't know if it was the left guard or the center's job. But I think that's where the biggest difference is.
Interestingly enough, when I'm looking back at the Pro Football, he got sacked 4 times, but they only gave 2 of those sacks to the offensive line. And honestly, I would have only given 1 of those sacks to the offensive line. Of the 2 sacks that, well, maybe that was what it is. But the 2 sacks that I noticed the most was the first sack, and that was on Palmer. He just held the ball too long. He had Darren Fells in the middle of the field wide open. He just had to make that throw, and he felt the pressure. Instead of getting rid of the ball, he tried to move to the pocket and then almost got back to the line of scrimmage. The second sack, I don't know what in the world happened. Massey and Cooper just saw.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened, but then after the play, I don't know if you noticed that Massey kind of pointed at Cooper like there was a communication issue afterwards. Kind of, it looked like Bobby was trying to pass the blame on to Cooper. Like, what the hell were you doing? I'm like, but you saw both of them try to guard one guy and in the end guard nobody.
Yeah, and that can't happen. And then when you're blocking Robert Quinn, you're going to get a sack. Like you can pin that on Veldu if you want. You cannot. Like I think he's struggled comparatively to last year, but he wasn't the issue in pass protection. Like I said, he struggled more in the run game than I expected him to, but he was not the issue in pass protection at all.
And which brings us to the point: how could, if after we see this performance against St. Louis, is there more concern with the offensive line than before, or do we chalk that up to just a really good defensive line? I mean, they were talked up all week, but at the end of the day, if you look at the offensive production, they rushed for another 113 yards. So they were able to get a push of the running game, and they didn't even run the ball. It's not like they tried to run the ball a lot. They still had success running the ball. They didn't at key moments. They gave up a lot of hits on Carson, but overall, Carson had himself a good game. It just was he had moments where he was bad. The interception to Brown, which he threw. Bruce mentioned it. BA mentioned it. Presser after the game that he got the ball out late. I don't know if it was so much late. He was a greedy throw that his arm just wasn't there for. If he's going to make that throw with that sort of coverage, he's got to get that over the coverage because
almost out of the end zone.
Because John Brown, if there's something we know about him, he's not good about fighting for the ball in coverage. He's not that type of receiver. He can run under a ball, but he doesn't fight for balls very well. Like, if there's traffic, he loses every time because of his size.
Yeah, and that's that's what happens. And like I said, his arm is stronger in the intermediate, but I still think he's got a little hitch in his giddy up, so to speak, for his actual deep ball. Where we saw it in the preseason a couple times where he thought he overthrew John Brown and J.J. Nelson, and he didn't even reach them, or they had to come back to the ball. A lot of John Brown's biggest plays this season are as a result of underthrown deep passes and drawing interferences. So, but I think with the offensive line, to go back to your original question, I think it was a combination of two things. I think it was, one, you finally got the five guys that were, your quote-unquote starters before this, in the preseason and penciled in, whatever. But then you went up against the best defensive line in football. I joked about it during the week, but really, you're Mike Iupati. It's probably not the game you want to come back to. And he played well.
He did.
So that should tell you everything. But, I do think it had an impact on the line as a whole. And you and I talked about it before the game. I was interested in the fact that Ted Larson was the other inactive offensive lineman, right?
Yeah,
so
it was odd, but that's
Watford
because
and A.T. Shipley.
And the reason is because Shipley has that fullback role. He can play guard and center, so he's the backup center. Watford can play all over the line pretty much, and they've really been high on him. But it was interesting because Larson he had played quite well for the first 3 games of the year.
But I think that's where I don't want to say issue, but maybe issue is the right word. But I think that's where the issue of Pro Football Focus or even my personal grade comes in versus what the team sees. Because, like you said, the versatility of the other guys. But if he's your highest graded offensive lineman, he was the Cardinals' highest graded offensive lineman in all their games on Pro Football Focus, and the highest overall score for the season. And now he's inactive. I mean, I think that's where the details come into. We don't have the whole story. So as much as we try to break everything down...
Aside from the part that we learned in the preseason and training camp, he was a terrible center.
Yeah, I think we all got that part.
And sorry, Ted, I hope you don't listen to this show because, we just called you terrible.
Hey,
sorry.
Hey, you know what, though? At least I was complimenting him. So
I do know that Bradley Sal sometimes, searches Twitter because I've had a couple of comments that I've made about him, not disparaging, but favorited him by him. And he proved me wrong. It proved going back to when they drafted DJ Humphrey sometime after that, I thought probably Bradley Sal has, seen his last days with the Cardinals since DJ is probably a better backup option. That didn't prove to be true so far. Sal, he favorited that tweet.
Yeah.
He favorited that tweet. So let's talk about the pass rush, or the lack thereof. I mean, they got the one sack of Foles on that stunt.
But you go back to that play, it was almost like what happened with the Chris Long sack, where 2 guys went after Calais and nobody blocked Marcus Golden. Dude had a complete, and I'm not trying to bag on Marcus. That was, you take what you can get in the NFL, and that was what he got there. So.
And Alex Okafor had one pretty good play where he got pressure. He snuffed out he didn't bite on the play fake, and he followed on the rollout. When Foles rolled out right, he didn't get a sack, but he basically had to throw the ball away. So, but other than that, Alex Okafor didn't have much of an impact at all. Lamar Woodley hasn't given them much in terms of pass rush. Really, what we've seen is Marcus Golden in limited snaps is doing the most effective job, at least off the edge, of getting pressure.
Did they give him another half sack?
They did. They split him. They got the sack was split between he and Calais.
So he has 1.5 sacks on the season now?
Yes.
Dude's working really hard for a lot of half sacks. But yeah.
But he seems like the only one that's getting any sort of consistent, energy towards the quarterback. Obviously, Lamar does other things. And Okafor just hasn't been, aside from the 2 sacks of the first week, he's not been a force. And he's not cleaning up yet. And that's the thing.
You and I talked about Okafor before. I thought the expectations of him were unrealistic by the fan base. Dude was a fourth-round pick for a reason. There's very rarely guys that are drafted that late that end up, being Pro Bowl level All-Pro guys. Justin Houston fell to the third round because dude was an idiot off the field at the time, right? So that's a little different. But guys that don't have an injury history or, they don't follow the pass rushers don't follow the fourth round, especially from a Big 5 school. So, I think we put too much in our expectations of he can be a 10 to 14 sack guy. I saw that he could be a consistent double-digit sack guy, and it's like, you know what? Let's hope he gets to that Paul Kruger level of he's not a $14 million a year pass rusher, but he can be a $6 to $8 million a year pass rusher that's getting 8 to 12 sacks this season because he's cleaning up the pressure other people are creating. And because there hasn't been that other pressure, then it ends up that there's nothing for him to clean up, and we've kind of seen that the last 3 games.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the others. We already mentioned the play calling. I don't have a huge problem with the play calling because when the plays didn't work, it wasn't because of poor play design, especially in the passing game. It was because, especially late in the game, it was simply because Carson misfired. I don't have a problem with that. The plays were there to be made. And I don't know how much, especially when they started from behind, especially when they got behind a couple of scores early, you especially get that strong line. And I don't know what it was, but they don't have the same sort of success and weren't having consistent success running the ball. I can see why they went away from it. So I don't have a huge problem with that. But let's kind of go to the Rams side of the ball, like the defensive side of the ball for the Cardinals. 2 players that did have big impacts on the game. One's Todd Gurley, one Tavon Austin. 15 carries of Todd Gurley's 19 went for only 23 yards. Then the other 4 went for 123. A very, very big difference. And on one of them, even the very last one, you can almost kind of eliminate that one because the Cardinals went from trying to tackle him to try to get the ball away, and he just sat down before the end zone. The big one was the 52-yarder, and I didn't notice the gap issue. I thought I gave credit to Gurley more on that play, but Cardinals really did have him bottled up until the last part of the game. I did see one play where, and it might have been a 52-yarder, Kevin Minter blamed himself for not lining guys up. I think that was like on one play. He didn't get guys lined up. There was another where Minter spun out of a block that caused him to leave his gap. But my goodness, as good as the Cardinals were against the run, you see how really special Gurley can be, especially if against teams that aren't nearly that good against the run.
Well, and that's where, you and I kind of differ in our whole, the run game type thing, because I know that they were ahead, so they were milking the clock, but I really think that being able to consistently run the ball, even when you're not having the success you need, 15 for 23, and then 4 for, 100 and a lot.
Yeah.
That's what you have to, you kind of have to be okay with getting those 10 carries for 20 yards, because maybe the other 10 are going to go for 65 or 70, and so that's just. But yeah, I thought Gurley, he did what he's gonna probably do for a long time. And one of the things I said on Twitter today is the Rams have a lot of the 2013 Cardinals in them. The only difference being that they probably have a running back that can grind out games as well.
Yes, they don't have the playmakers at receiver, so they can't rely on the quarterback. They don't have that part, but they have the slowdown. They actually kind of the way you want to construct a team that's defensively built. They have the backs to be able to slow the game down and take possessions away from the other team.
Yep. And the one thing, and I tweeted these out last night, the one thing is Nick Foles kind of owns this Cardinals squad.
Yeah.
I mean, 61% completions, a little over 800 yards, and 8 touchdowns to only 2 interceptions. Say what you will about Nick Foles, the quarterback, but you look at just the stats, like just the numbers, and there's not a whole lot different in terms of productivity between Carson Palmer and Nick Foles. And that, like, when I looked at that and I saw that, that was kind of baffling to me. Like, I know he played in that Chip Kelly Eagles offense that apparently is the easiest thing to ever play in, but we're seeing Sam Bradford struggle, and Nick Foles kind of continue to carry over I'm not going to throw out interceptions, I'm going to pick my spots to make big plays. And
he's a better version of Alex Smith.
Exactly, and maybe that's, like you said, on a team that can rely on defense and now maybe a running game, that's kind of the perfect fit. And now all of a sudden, Tavon Austin's starting to actually be okay. Like, he was a bust. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. He's been a bust his first couple of years in the NFL. And now all of a sudden, through, I think, 4 games, he has like 4 or 5 touchdowns. So it's a lot different than what he was before. So I think when you look at the Cardinals defensively, they played well, but the key players for the Rams made plays when they had to. And I think that can kind of summarize the whole difference in the game overall, right? Like, Nick Foles made throws when he needed to, and for whatever reason, Carson Palmer didn't.
Right.
Tavon Austin held on to the football when he needed to. For whatever reason, Larry Fitzgerald and David Johnson didn't. And if you told me before the game that, Fitzgerald and Chris and David Johnson and Palmer would be outplayed by their counterparts, I think all Cardinals fans would laugh at that. But that's kind of what happened. The Cardinals and Rams played fairly even defensively. It was just that the Rams, quote-unquote stars, just happened to play a better game than the Cardinals stars, and really that's, kind of what made the difference in the game.
And to the point of Tavon Austin is kind of an interesting thing. There was a lot of criticism coming in from fans, some questioning as to the strategy they had of having Gerard Powers guard Tavon Austin. When the truth is, there were basically 2 plays where it became a problem, and one was more, it wasn't so much the Powers coverage as it was communication, scheme, however it worked. They decided, and Patrick Peterson talked about this last week on Thursday, if you look at, Tavon Austin is the centerpiece of that offense, but his play isn't down the field. They use him to move him around. Then Jared Cook is super important, but it's Kenny Britt who makes their big plays down the field, which is exactly why Patrick Peterson was lined up primarily against Kenny Britt. And guess what Patrick did? Completely shut him down. And then the one time Foles goes at him, Patrick makes a play. So in that sense, it makes sense because Tavon Austin doesn't typically make plays down the field. He's fast, he's shifty, he'll get those screens, he'll get those end arounds, and then he puts good yards on them. So putting Powers on him primarily, he made a couple of good plays, but there was the touchdown. Well, first the 46-yarder, which happened to be, he wasn't even guarding to start with. He passed him off onto the zone, and Rashad Johnson got beat on that play. The touchdown that he gave up to Austin was interesting because you could tell, and I think this is that was the play Bruce was talking about as opposed to the Stedman Bailey touchdown. BA said that that Powers was giving him inside leverage, expecting someone to pick him up. That's where Tyrann Mathieu came in. But then after that, no one felt that, and so Gerard saw that happening, and he had to try to recover, and so it looked like he got beat back. That was more of a communication as opposed to straight coverage problem. So I didn't have a problem at all how they defended Austin. There was one that was with the throw by Foles on that touchdown was perfect. And then, there was a couple plays where he just, with his feet, made plays, and that wasn't anyone's fault other than the fact that Tavon is fast and shifty and talented.
Yeah, and my only question was why we didn't see more Mathieu on him. And I know you don't want to I wasn't even talking about the whole game when I asked the question about Powers. My question was they had some opportunities where you can get him, like you said, he's a space player. And there were opportunities where there's instances where it would have made more sense to see Mathieu on him. And I get, like I said, you don't want to have him chase him around the field the whole game because that's not what Matthew's best at, and that's not the best use of his athletic ability. But I thought that was a interesting decision.
And interestingly enough, the one play where Mathieu he broke on the ball on that play to Austin where he almost got the touchdown on the little screen pass. It burned him because he didn't stay contained. He almost busted the play up, almost got an interception. But as a result of that, he ended up going for about 12 yards. And I can probably point to a few reasons why. When they use Austin frequently, they went with 2 wide. They had a lot of 2 wide sets. They went with some bunch in the 3 wide, but when they would 2 wide, Matthew's playing back at a safety position, which doesn't make it real viable to have him come up and guard Austin.
Well, and here's the thing, and it's why, for whatever reason, the Rams beat the Cardinals and the Seahawks and lost to teams like the Steelers and Washington, because I think oftentimes teams like the Cardinals and Seahawks think to themselves, we have enough talent that we don't have to focus on player X. And so player X would be Tavon Austin. And yet, in both of those games, he has been the difference maker to why the Rams have won. And I just think that's a good way to believe in your team, like a very good way to believe in your team. But sometimes it can burn you as a coach, where you just have so much faith in your guys that, something like that happens. And like I said, I'm not going to blame Betcher too much for anything because as the season goes along, I think we're going to see more and more how handicapped they are in the pass rush. And we're talking about a Rams offensive line that's starting, basically 3.
A second-year player.
3 with Craig Robinson and a guy in who's the guy they signed from the Raiders, Austin Howard, who's basically like playing with one limb. I forget, he either got a leg or a shoulder problem. Remember, like you're playing against an offensive line that, if you just look on paper, you would go, the Cardinals' defensive front 7 should annihilate these guys, and yet the Rams schemed it up perfectly, like you said earlier, to put themselves in a position to win that game, to keep the ball out of Carson Palmer's hands and make him, and then when it was in Carson Palmer's hands, that he would have to throw the ball a lot. And that's in the scope of who the Rams are, that's how they win football games. You put Nick Foles in a position where he's going to have to make throws down the field and consistently beat you, guess what? You're going to win the game 9 times out of 10. But you do the opposite, where you just ask Nick Foles to manage the game and not screw up. Well, they're going to probably win, maybe not 9 out of 10 times, but it's going to be 6 to 7 out of 10 times. And that's why I think at the end of the day, you're going to see this Rams team right around 9 wins. Everybody makes a joke about Jeff Fisher being 8-8 all the time. I think they'll be right there again. And I wouldn't be shocked if they were the second wild card when it's all said and done. I don't think they're going to win the division. I still think, as we'll get to in a second, I think that's a two-team race. But I do think that they're going to be close enough in the end to push for a wild card spot.
A little bit of the good side of what the Cardinals did, some positives. Offensively, they still moved the ball. They just stalled in the red zone. It was kind of more 2013, 2014, only effectiveness between the 20s. They ran the ball well. They had another 113 yards on the ground. So that makes another game of running for over 100 yards, and they almost cracked 115. So that was another positive. We saw some good, again, another shutdown performance by Patrick Peterson. Again, Kenny Britt isn't Calvin Johnson. Torrey Smith isn't Calvin Johnson. And so he hasn't been truly tested per se. But
those are the guys that used to kill him.
Yeah, but so he's got the big game this week because he's going to be matched up against Calvin Johnson, and that'll be fun to watch.
Well, and you asked my wife, and Calvin Johnson sucks because she has him on her fantasy football team, and he's been garbage this year. And I think that's partially due to the new OC and the scheme. That's one thing that we've always said about Patrick, and I think that's where I honestly, like, the diabetes thing, whether the effect it had on his game is arguable, in my opinion. But I will say this. The fact that he had so many questions asked about him last year, and the questions about his focus as a player, and can he be a true number one shutdown corner, I think his focus is better this year than it ever has been. I see him more attentive and motivated in covering Kenny Britt and Torrey Smith than he was in previous seasons. And in that way, I think that's where he's grown as a player.
Well, and then the one catch he gave up, it was on that line of scrimmage, that screenplay where he snuffed it out. And I don't think that was even his initial assignment, because before the play, you could tell that he knew what was coming. He told Gerard Powers what to do, and he just snuffed it out and tossed Tavon to the ground after a loss of 1. So he was credited for having given up a catch, but he blew the play up.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like, advanced stats don't always tell the whole story. And I have a good buddy who I really respect. His name's Ian Wharton, and he does coverage production stuff. He has a whole website dedicated to it and breaks down all of cornerbacks and that's one of the questions I have is, what, like, catches given up versus, like, targets, like, if a guy catches 5 balls on 5 passes that are 5 yards or less, how is that the corner's fault? Like, what is that in terms of, like, how do we grade that? Because is it really the corner's fault that they're afraid to attack him downfield, so they're throwing the ball short of the line of scrimmage, or just throwing quick outs or smokes or something like that right out there? No, that's not the corner's fault. And so if I think what Peterson has done this year, and I know
they're not even throwing at him. That's the thing. They're not even throwing his way, and they threw his way a lot last year.
Yeah, and I think that speaks volumes to what he has done as a player, because he's not losing focus against Kenny Britt and Torrey Smith and whoever I don't even know who the Bears' big receiver was that game, because Austin Jeffries is out. So, whoever he's gone up against this year, he has literally shut down everybody. And, he didn't get the PFF quarter season all-pro cornerback spot, but I'd argue that outside of Josh Norman in Carolina, there hasn't been a better cornerback this season in the NFL. And you and I have been some of the harshest critics about not necessarily his play, but his focus and attention to, the non-marquee matchups of, against Calvin Johnson and or against Demaryius Thomas and those guys.
We look forward to the rest of the season. Obviously, if you're just looking at a loss, 3-1 after the first quarter of the season, not that big a deal. They are in first place. They should be 4-0. But let's talk about significance of this loss. You mentioned it. We talked about it before we went on the air, before we started recording. We believe that while the Cardinals are ahead, that the Seahawks are going to bounce back. And I see kind of the same situation as last year. The Cardinals had the schedule to kind of build up their wins and build up a lead. But then they close the season against some potentially tough teams. Philadelphia doesn't look as tough, but they'll be playing in Philadelphia. They're going to be playing Green Bay, and they're going to play. And they've got their other 4 division games right in that last stretch of the season, plus Green Bay at home. So they're going to be in a position. Seattle can make a move late, and the Cardinals will be in a situation where they need to hold on. This loss, to me, while it's encouraging in some ways because the Cardinals lost that game, like I said, I think they beat themselves. But in the grand scheme of things, is something I've said the last couple of years. To win the NFC West, because you're going to have the 2 teams kind of in the mix, division record matters. 4-2 is the bare minimum, I believe, to be able to win the division. 3-3 is not going to cut it. 3-3 will get you to the wild card. I said that before last season. That's exactly what happened. A 3-3 record got them the wild card. Had they gone 4-2, they'd have won the division. They'd have had home field. And so this really puts them, at least in the sense of tiebreakers, if you're thinking bigger picture for the division, this loss is really tough because you can't lose at home in the division. Because now, if you're thinking 4-2, that means they have to win twice on the road. So, which is possible, but they have to win it at home. They have to win at home against Seattle because that's their last division home game. And they have to either beat San Francisco, and they have to beat St. Louis on the road, and they have to either beat Seattle on the road or San Francisco on the road. And as dumpster fire as San Francisco's looked, I'm not willing to say that's a sure thing. Just like Seattle, the St. Louis game is no sure thing either.
Yeah, and you look at San Francisco's 2 games at home, they're a completely different team. Yeah, they lost to Green Bay, but they were just, they were a different team. So I'm with you. Like, the disappointing thing isn't that they lost the game. We all knew that this was not a 19-0 team. Like, that just wasn't going to happen. But I don't think any of us expected a home loss in, October against the 1-2 Rams, coming off a loss against the Michael Vick-led Pittsburgh Steelers, right? Like,
and the Washington Redskins and the Redskins.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I don't think any of us expected that. Like, if you told me that the Cardinals were going to be 3-1 at this point, I would have said, they dropped the game to the Bears. Now, nobody knew that all the Bears would be injured, but they dropped the game.
The Saints game would have been the one they would have dropped.
Or they came out flat against the Saints and Drew Brees. I don't think anybody's going to be like, I point right to the Rams game, and I think that's what is, quote unquote disappointing, is that you wanted to see this Cardinals team be kind of the leader. We talked about it before. Like, once Big Ben got hurt, there was really not a whole lot of reason that they shouldn't be 7-1, 8-0 going into that the second half of their schedule when they first play Seattle. And now all of a sudden you're like, 4-1 already, or 3-1 already, and they're only holding a 1-game lead in the division. And now they have to go up against a team that is beyond desperate because their season is basically over in Detroit. But if they lose on Sunday, there's no basically about it. Their season is completely
and
over.
that takes us to that last point. You are really worried about going into Detroit because of the hunger factor, the desperation. I get that, but the numbers, especially after playing against Seattle, so they have a short week. They're coming off a game in Seattle where they already get banged up because they played Seattle, and teams that last season playing Seattle the next week went 3-12, and no one won after week 7 after playing Seattle. So I'm not worried. I'm not overlooking them, but especially if you look at the Cardinals have won 6 straight games against it, because you know what the Lions do? They Lions. They do Lions things. That Matthew Stafford to me is sort of I think this is the guy. Matthew Stafford is Carson Palmer of 10 years ago. And, in fact, what I want to see happen is for the Lions to give up on Matthew Stafford and have B.A. get a hold of him and then have him be the next doing the Carson Palmer things now, because he is a wildly talented guy who just dumb things sometimes.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that worries me about this team is they still have that, even though Ndamukong Suh and Nick Fairley are done, they still have a really ferocious pass rush. So if for whatever reason we have a game where we get a 46-21 run pass ratio or pass run ratio, I think that plays again.
Palmer gets the yips again.
Yeah, it plays into the strength of the Detroit defense, and all of a sudden you could have Carson Palmer running for his life from Ezekiel Ansah and Darryl Tapp and a fairly talented Detroit defensive front four. When I say I'm worried in the sense of, like, I think the Cardinals are going to win something like 24-20, but it's going to be, to me, one of those games where they probably jump out early and then hold on late, or they start slow and are able to overcome the momentum of Detroit and overwhelm them in the end because they are more talented. Something that was almost that happened against the Rams. So I think you're in a similar situation at this point. You just want to see them not miss throws, not drop passes, not fumble the ball in the end, because as you and I have talked about, as much as I think the Rams beat the Cardinals and you think the Cardinals beat the Cardinals, we can both agree on the mistakes that were made. If they happen again in Detroit,
they could lose again.
Exactly, and so it's more about the Cardinals. If they come out and play their game and play mistake-free, there's only 2 teams in the NFL that can beat them if that happens, and we'll see one in Week 16 and the other one maybe in February. But outside of that, right now, I truly think that the Cardinals are still a top 3 team in the NFL. They have to play like it this week.
They do,
And
that'll bring us to the end of another All Cardinal show with Revenge of the Birds Radio. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. I have not set up a show per yet. I'm actually going to send off a note to Sean Ewell from Pride of Detroit, a guy we've had on the past couple of years. Hopefully, you can get him on to preview the Lions, and hopefully this time next week, when you're listening to the show again, we were talking about happier times in Cardinals land, and we're talking about a 4-1 team coming off another dominating performance. But that will wrap up this week's All Cardinal show for Revenge of the Birds Radio. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening, and go Cardinals.
Have a good night.
You've been listening to Revenge of the Birds. Keep the conversation going by visiting revengeofthebirds.com. Follow us on Twitter at Revenge of Birds. You can also find us on iTunes at facebook.com/revengeofthebirds.